What if the most dangerous weapon in the world isn't a missile, a drone, or a special forces unit? What if it's a man who doesn't exist? In July 2006, inside one of the most surveilled buildings on the planet, surrounded by 69,000 people, dozens of security agencies, and a global broadcast audience of 700 million, a man was killed without a single alarm being triggered. No evacuation, no lockdown, no suspect. The person who did it walked out through the main gate, bought a bottle of water, and caught the subway. And the identity he used to get inside that stadium? It still exists. Right now, in a database somewhere, unchallenged. This is not a story about a perfect weapon. This is a story about a perfect lie, and what it cost the man who had to live inside it. There is a specific kind of fear that has no name in any language. It is not the fear of being caught. It is not the fear of dying. It is the fear of contradicting yourself, saying one thing today that doesn't match something you said 3 weeks ago to someone who remembers everything. A soldier can be brave under fire because the threat is visible. You know what is trying to kill you. A man running a cover identity for 8 months in a city full of people who think they know him faces something different. The threat is invisible. It lives inside small moments. A pause that lasts 1 second too long. A habit that belongs to the real person, not the legend. A detail, a football team, a childhood memory, the way you hold a coffee cup, that doesn't match the biography you've been rehearsing for months. The man in this story understood all of this. He had been doing this for 11 years, and he was still afraid. Here is a question that intelligence agencies spent nearly a decade trying to answer. How do you find a man who has spent 20 years making sure he cannot be found? Ibrahim Al-Zarani was not a household name. He was never going to be. That was the entire point. He held no military rank inside Hamas. He issued no public statements. He appeared in no photographs, no intercepted communications, no court documents. He was, by every official record, a private citizen of no particular significance. But private citizens do not move money through hawala networks across 4 countries. Private citizens do not have their financial fingerprints, however faintly, at the edge of 3 separate mass casualty attacks over 4 years. The Park Hotel in Netanya, March 2002. A Passover Seder interrupted by a bomber walking into a dining room. 30 people dead, 140 wounded. A bus on Jerusalem's route. 14 June 2003. 16 dead in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. Twin bombings in Be'er Sheva. August 2004. 16 more dead, nearly 100 wounded. Al-Zarani did not plant any of those bombs. He probably never met the men who did. He just made sure there was money. Quietly, reliably. From a distance so carefully managed that investigators working the financial trails after each attack could never draw a straight line back to him. Only curves, only suggestions, only patterns that required years of cross-referencing to begin to resolve into something that looked like a person. That person was Al-Zarani, and by 2005, Mossad was almost certain of it. Almost certain is not the same as certain, and in targeted elimination operations, almost certain is not sufficient. The operation that would eventually become Berlin did not begin with a surveillance team or a weapon or even a specific plan. It began with a database. Since 2002, a financial intelligence unit inside Mossad had been running what they designated Project Ledger, a long-term pattern recognition effort to map the informal money network sustaining Hamas operations in the West Bank and Gaza. Not to freeze accounts, not to make arrests, to build a model, to understand the architecture. Most intelligence operations are built around specific, time-sensitive targets. Project Ledger was different. It was built around patience. Analysts fed data into the model for 3 years. Hawala transaction records obtained through coordination with Jordanian intelligence. donation flows traced from Gulf charities being monitored through a signals collection partnership. Wire transfer anomalies flagged by European banking oversight bodies that had no idea their data was being used for this purpose. By the end of 2005, the model had produced a candidate. One individual whose shadow appeared repeatedly across multiple independent networks. Never directly. Always one step removed. Always behind a layer of people who did not know who they were ultimately serving. The 73% probabilistic match was built around one specific asset, a source inside a Jordanian financial regulatory office whose codename was never disclosed publicly. What this source provided was a physical description, a known alias, and something that seemed, at the time, like useless contextual detail. Al-Zarani loved football. Not as cover, not professionally, personally. With the kind of genuine attachment that a man carries from childhood without ever questioning it. The analyst who received this report filed it under behavioral profile notes and moved on. That detail would sit dormant for months. The first unresolved risk was already present before anyone picked up a weapon or booked a flight. The 73% match was not certainty, it was probability. A 27% margin of error in a financial model, applied to a targeted killing in a public venue, means there is more than 1 in 4 chance that the entire architecture of the operation has been built around the wrong man. This concern was documented internally. It was weighed. It was not treated as disqualifying, it was treated as acceptable. The people who made that determination had done this calculation before. They would do it again. They lived in a world where 73% was sometimes the best available certainty, and waiting for more could mean another bus, another hotel dining room, another afternoon that ends in smoke and glass and sirens. But acceptable risk and zero risk are not the same thing. And this particular acceptable risk would shape every decision that followed. His operational designation was Daniel. That is not a real name, a cover name, or a confirmed code name. It is a label used by the small number of researchers who have worked to reconstruct this account from fragmentary sources, none of which are officially acknowledged. What can be reconstructed is this. Daniel had been running long-term cover identities for 11 years by the time Project Ledger produced its candidate. He was not a field combatant in the conventional sense. His weapons were not firearms primarily, they were fluency, patience, the ability to inhabit a person who was not him, not for days or weeks but for months, without the seams showing. He had done this 3 times before, in 3 different countries, under 3 different legends. Each time, he had returned. Each time, the re-entry into his actual life took longer than the previous one. His supervisors noted this in evaluations. They noted it as a manageable pattern. He noted it differently. He did not discuss this with anyone. The legend they built for Berlin was called Met Demir. On paper, Met Demir was a 36-year-old Turkish-born freelance camera operator. He had been employed by Al-Qas Sport, a Qatari satellite sports broadcaster, for 8 months before the World Cup final. He had filmed 2 earlier group stage matches on the same credentials. He had been paid. He had filed taxes in Turkey. He had been onboarded into the Al-Qas Sport contractor system like any other hire. None of this was forged, it was constructed. Through a Mossad network asset inside the company's contracting division, the employment record had been created through the actual system. Met Demir was not a fake employee. He was a real one, backed by a real administrative trail. This was the detail that made the legend feel airtight. It was also the detail that created the second unresolved risk, one that nobody on the operational team fully understood yet. Because building a legend through a real company, using real administrative infrastructure, means the legend has a life outside your control. It interacts with real people, real colleagues, real workplace dynamics, real women who notice things. In Munich, 3 weeks before the final, Daniel had dinner with the Alcas Sport production team after a group stage match. Her name, in this account, is Nadia. She was a production coordinator. Efficient, observant, the kind of person who managed 12 things simultaneously and forgot none of them. Midway through dinner, she mentioned, casually, without apparent accusation, that she had a cousin who worked with the Turkish Camera Operators Association, that she had asked him, in passing, whether Met Demir was registered. Her cousin had said the name didn't appear. She had laughed, said the registry was probably incomplete, said it didn't matter. And then she had changed the subject. Daniel had agreed that the registry was incomplete. He had smiled. He had kept eating. Inside, he ran the calculation in under 3 seconds. The registry non-appearance was explainable. Nadia had already dismissed it herself. She was not suspicious, or if she was, she had chosen not to pursue it. The cover had held. But here was the thing Daniel could not resolve, alone in his hotel room. Later that night, he had survived Munich not because the legend was perfect. He had survived because Nadia had decided not to look harder, and he had no idea why she had made that decision, which meant he had no idea whether she would make it again. The operation was approved. The final was 3 weeks away, and the only question that mattered now was not whether Daniel could maintain the legend under pressure. It was whether he could maintain it around a woman who had already seen the first crack, and chosen, for reasons entirely her own, to look away. Why had she looked away? Berlin in late June runs on football and noise. Every bar, every square, every open space in the city had been absorbed into the tournament's orbit. German flags on every balcony. Strangers speaking 10 languages sharing tables without introduction. The city had briefly become something that cities rarely are, completely permissive. Everyone belonged. Everyone had a reason to be here. This was, from an operational standpoint, ideal. It was also, from an operational standpoint, a trap. Because permissive environments don't just absorb operatives, they absorb targets too. And a man who had spent a decade treating every public space as a threat vector had arrived in Berlin and found something he hadn't encountered in years. He had found a city where nobody was looking for him. Al-Zarani arrived on June 28th. Jordanian passport. The name Tariq Mansour. A mid-range hotel in Charlottenburg, West Berlin. Not a luxury hotel that would draw the wrong kind of attention. Not a budget hotel that would be inconsistent with a man traveling for a once-in-a-lifetime event. A mid-range hotel. The choice of a man who thought carefully about how he appeared to the world, even on holiday. The 4-person surveillance team had positioned themselves across the city 24 hours before his arrival. 2 men, 2 women, different nationalities, different cover reasons for being in Berlin during the World Cup. None of them traveling together on any document, checked into any hotel within 2 kilometers of each other, or visibly coordinating at any point. Confirmation came 6 hours after Al-Zarani checked in. He matched the composite. His mannerisms matched the behavioral profile from the Ammon source. He moved with the particular unhurried confidence of a man who had convinced himself he was invisible. The surveillance log entry from that first evening read 3 words. Subject appears relaxed. Those 3 words were transmitted to Tel Aviv as good news. They should have been read more carefully. Over the following 11 days, the surveillance team documented a man in something close to a genuine vacation. He visited the Reichstag on July 1st, stood in the glass dome for 40 minutes, looking down at the parliamentary chamber below, a man who spent his life in the invisible infrastructure of political violence, standing in the most transparent building in European democracy. He ate at restaurants without counter-surveillance behavior. He did not double back on roads. He did not vary his departure times in any consistent pattern. He bought a football magazine at a kiosk near the Tiergarten on July 3rd and sat on a bench for an hour reading it. A surveillance operative sat 20 meters away and watched him turn pages. He looked like a man who had finally, after a long time, allowed himself to stop. This was the thing nobody on the operational team said out loud, but that the surveillance logs recorded implicitly through the accumulation of detail. Al-Zarani was not running counter-surveillance because he did not believe anyone knew he was here. His entire security posture for the duration of his Berlin stay rested on a single assumption: that the trip was clean, that the private, personal decision to attend a football match, made through a careful financial channel using a trusted alias, existed in a compartment that his operational enemies could not reach. He had spent 20 years building those compartments. He trusted them completely, and because he trusted them completely, he had lowered every defensive mechanism he had. The surveillance team was not following a careful man who had relaxed slightly. They were following a careful man who had become, for the first time in 2 decades, careless. The two things look identical from the outside. They are not. On July 5th, Al-Zarani visited the Olympia Stadion alone. He walked the exterior perimeter for 40 minutes. He studied the entrance gate configurations. He spent 12 minutes observing the broadcast compound on the western side of the stadium, the cluster of satellite trucks, cable runs, and temporary infrastructure that accumulates around any major televised event. He bought a coffee near Gate 7 and sat for 20 minutes, watching a maintenance crew work on a side entrance. The surveillance photographs of this visit reached Tel Aviv the same evening. The operational interpretation was immediate and confident: a man scouting his route to the stadium for match night, minimizing the chance of being caught in the wrong gate queues. The behavior of an organized, methodical person who wanted to enjoy the evening without logistical friction. This interpretation was almost certainly correct. But a junior analyst in Tel Aviv, whose note was reviewed, acknowledged, and set aside, flagged an alternative reading: the broadcast compound observation. 12 minutes was a long time to watch satellite trucks and cable routing if you were simply orienting yourself to the stadium layout. 12 minutes of watching the Western broadcast infrastructure, combined with the Gate 7 position, could indicate something else. Could indicate a man who knew or suspected that a camera position on the upper western tier might have an unobstructed sightline to the east stand. The note was 3 paragraphs. It was set aside in under 10 minutes. The operational team had spent 11 days watching a man who showed no counter-surveillance behavior. One anomalous observation during a stadium visit, in the context of 11 days of clean surveillance, did not warrant reconsidering an authorization that had already been granted. The note was filed. The operation continued, and the unanswered question whether Al-Zarani had been for 12 minutes on July 5th looking at exactly the right place went into the record and stayed there. Daniel arrived at the broadcast compound on July 6th for technical setup. He moved through stadium accreditation as Met Demir had moved through accreditation twice before. His laminated pass, his equipment manifest, his Alcas Sport paperwork. Each check was routine, each was passed. He set up the camera position in the broadcast booth, upper western tier. He documented the sightlines, the ambient noise patterns, the acoustics of the glass booth under simulated crowd noise levels he calculated from prior matches. He was thorough, he was professional, and at no point during the setup process did he feel anything that could be described as certainty. Because the night before in the hotel, in the specific quiet that comes after preparation is complete and execution has not yet begun, he had allowed himself to do something that long-cover operatives are trained not to do. He had run the actual probability, not the mission probability, the personal one. He had been Met Demir for 8 months. In that time, he had interacted with 17 people who would, if asked, confirm knowing him. 3 of them were people he had spent meaningful time with: dinners, match day logistics, the specific intimacy of production work where you spend 14 hours in close quarters with colleagues. Nadia was one of those three. And the thing about Nadia was not the registry question. The thing about Nadia was that she was observant in the particular way that people are observant when they like you. She paid attention not because she was suspicious, but because she was interested. She had asked him in Munich about his family in Istanbul. He had answered as Met Demir, specific, consistent with the legend biography. She had nodded, then a pause. Then, you don't talk about them like someone who's close to them. He had said that his relationship with his family was complicated. She had accepted this. But the observation itself, you don't talk about them like someone who's close to them, was not the observation of a suspicious colleague running a security check. It was the observation of someone who was listening carefully enough to notice the emotional texture underneath the words. Met Demir's family biography was factually consistent. It was not emotionally inhabited, and Nadia had noticed that. Not loudly, not accusingly, but she had noticed. On July 7th, 2 days before the final, the operational team received a signals intercept through a liaison partner. It had been pulled from a monitored communications channel used by a mid-level Hamas Financial Network operative based in Amman. The intercept was partial, fragments of an encrypted exchange, partially decoded, partially reconstructed. It contained a reference to Berlin, a reference to the final, and a phrase that, in the original Arabic, translated approximately as, "The accountant travels without knowing the door is already open." The intercept was analyzed for 11 hours. 3 interpretations were formally considered. First, the phrase was coincidental. Hamas Financial Network communications routinely used travel and movement metaphors. The Berlin reference might indicate any one of several Hamas-adjacent figures in Germany being monitored for unrelated reasons. Second, the phrase indicated that Hamas had operational awareness that Al-Zarani was in Berlin, and that someone within the network had decided to let that information exist without warning him, which would mean someone in Al-Zarani's own network had made a calculation about his value, or his expendability. Third, the phrase indicated that someone, not Mossad, not Hamas, not the German security services, was aware of both Al-Zarani's presence and of something else. Something that made his arrival in Berlin, in their assessment, a door already open. The third interpretation was the one that nobody wanted to discuss directly, because the third interpretation meant that the deception, Met Demir, the Al-Qas sport credentials, the 8 months of constructed identity was known. Not suspected, known, and had been allowed to proceed. The operational team did not abort. Aborting would require transmitting a cancellation signal through the same communication infrastructure that might already be compromised. It would require extracting the surveillance team and Daniel through Berlin during the most surveilled period in the city's recent history. It would require explaining, to authorization levels above the operational team, why an 11-month operation was being canceled based on a partially decoded fragment that had 3 possible interpretations, 2 of which were benign. The abort discussion lasted 4 hours. The decision was to proceed, but the decision was made by people who were, for the first time in the operation, not certain that the story they were running was the only story in motion. Someone had written the phrase, "The door is already open," and nobody in that room, after 4 hours of argument, could say with confidence who had opened it, or for whom. The morning of the final, Daniel did not review the operational plan. He had reviewed it enough times that reviewing it again would not add information. It would only add noise. The kind of internal noise that accumulates in the hours before execution and mimics preparation while actually being its opposite. Instead, he went through the legend. Not the mechanics of the shot, the mechanics of the man. Met Demir woke at 7. Met Demir ate breakfast at the hotel restaurant, the same table he had used 3 times before, because consistency is not suspicious but inconsistency is. Demir ordered the same thing he had ordered the previous 2 mornings. He read a German sports newspaper without understanding half of it. He tipped the same amount. He arrived at the broadcast compound at 9:30 for pre-match technical checks. He said good morning to 2 Alka's sport colleagues he had worked with across the tournament. He made one complaint about a cable routing issue that had been logged the previous day, the kind of small professional grievance that real people carry forward and fake people forget. Everything was exactly as it should be, which was, in itself, the thing that worried him most. At 11:15, Nadia arrived at the compound. He had not known she would be there. Her role in the tournament had been logistics coordination, a function that for the final he had assumed would be managed remotely or by senior staff. She was there because a production coordinator from the Munich office had pulled out that morning with a medical issue. She had been called in as a replacement at short notice. She had not known he would be in the broadcast booth. They saw each other across the compound at the same moment. She raised a hand, he raised one back. Routine, collegial, entirely normal. And in the space of approximately 4 seconds, Daniel made a calculation that he would think about for years afterward. He could avoid her, find reasons to be in the booth all day, send Demir's apologies about pre-match preparation demands, keep the interaction to a minimum. Or he could behave like someone who had nothing to avoid. He chose the second. He walked over. They talked for 6 minutes about the logistics chaos of the final, accreditation bottlenecks, a satellite uplink issue that was being handled by the host broadcaster, the Heat. She asked if he had managed to see any of Berlin during the tournament. He said he had walked around Mitte a few times, found a good Turkish place near Alexanderplatz. She said she hadn't had time to see anything, that she'd spent 3 weeks in Germany and seen the inside of press compounds and hotel rooms. He said that was the job. She said yes. Then she said, I put a note in your file. End of tournament review. I recommended you for future contracts. He said thank you. She said, I also noted the registry thing from Munich, just as a follow-up item. Nothing serious. He said he appreciated her thoroughness. She nodded once, then she went back to her work. He walked back toward the booth, the note, in his file, in Alka's sports system. Not a conversation, not a question asked and answered between 2 people who then moved on. A written record, filed in a corporate HR database, time-stamped, persistent. He had survived Munich because Nadia had chosen not to look harder. He had understood that. What he had not understood, what he understood now, with 6 hours until the match, was that Nadia's choice not to look harder had not meant she forgot. It had meant she documented. He could not pull that file. He could not remove the note. He could not ask her to delete it without making it the most suspicious request she had ever received. The note existed. It would continue to exist. And there was nothing he could do about it between now and the final whistle except proceed. The match kicked off at 20,000. Daniel was in position. Camera housing assembled. Communication channel confirmed with the ground contact in row G, East Stand, 3 seats to Al-Zarani's left. The ground contact's first update arrived at 20:03, subject in seat. Companion present. Relaxed posture. Relaxed posture. The same 2 words the surveillance log had used on the first night. And now, sitting in the broadcast booth with the stadium below him and the operational weight of 8 months in his hands, Daniel found himself thinking about the intercept. The door is already open. The operational team had proceeded. The abort discussion had been resolved. He had been told the decision, not the reasoning behind every layer of it. But he was the one in the booth. He was the one who would fire or not fire, based on what he knew and what he didn't. And what he didn't know was this. If the intercept's third interpretation was correct, if someone had allowed this operation to proceed because it served a purpose Daniel wasn't aware of, then his successful completion of this mission might be exactly what someone else had planned for. He might not be the hunter. He might be the mechanism. He stayed in position, because there was no version of leaving that ended without catastrophic exposure. And because 11 years of this work had taught him that the third interpretation of any ambiguous intelligence is usually wrong. Usually. 7th minute. Zidane penalty, France 1-0. The stadium detonated. Daniel had the sight line. Noise levels were sufficient. He tracked through the lens. The ground contacts update, target standing, arms raised, embracing companion. He held. A moving target at 310 meters in full physical contact with another person was not acceptable. A missed shot would not just end the operation, it would end Met Demir. It would end the Alcas sport legend. It would end the 8 months of infrastructure in under 60 seconds. He held. The noise window closed. 19-minute. Materazzi header. 1-1. The Italian sections of the stadium came off their seats. The French sections absorbed the blow in silence. The noise was sectional, not total. The acoustic cover was directional, inadequate for a broadcast booth on the opposite side of the stadium from the Italian fan blocks. He held. The second half produced nothing. Not for lack of noise, for lack of alignment. Every crowd surge arrived at the wrong moment, the target shifting position, leaning forward, turning to speak to his companion. Each near window opened and closed in under 2 seconds. At 78 minutes, Daniel became aware of something he had not anticipated. He was beginning to hope the shot wouldn't come. Not because he couldn't do it, not because of hesitation about the mission, because every minute the operation remained active was another minute inside the booth, inside the legend, inside a position that had a note in an HR file and an intercept that nobody could fully interpret sitting somewhere in the operational record. Every additional minute was additional exposure. The shot wasn't just the objective, the shot was the exit. Extra time, 110th minute. Al-Zarani stood. The ground contacts update arrived in 2 words, subject moving. The duty officer's response came back in 2 words, proceed, penalties, meaning hold, wait for the shootout. Do not fire on a moving target. Al-Zarani was moving toward the aisle. His companion reached out, caught his arm, pointed at the pitch. Al-Zarani looked back. He sat down. He had changed his mind about leaving. In the booth, Daniel registered this as a near abort converted by accident into continuation. But here was the incorrect assumption that the operational team had carried from the beginning. The assumption built from 11 days of clean surveillance, from a behavioral profile that described a man finally at ease. They had assumed Al-Zarani's relaxation meant unawareness. They had assumed a man who stopped running counter-surveillance had stopped because he felt safe. What the surveillance logs had not captured, what no external observation could capture, was the interior of a man who had, sometime in the previous 48 hours, developed a feeling he could not name or source or act on. Not certainty, not suspicion, a feeling. The kind that makes you stand up and immediately decide to sit back down. The kind that passes and leaves you watching a football pitch in extra time, telling yourself it was nothing, that you were just tired, that the city was safe and the trip was clean and the final was almost over. He sat back down. The operation continued. Penalties. The noise inside the Olympia Stadion during a World Cup final shootout is not crowd behavior. It is collective physiology. 69,000 people moving between held breath and full body release in the space of seconds, over and over, generating a sound pattern that is less like cheering and more like weather. Pirlo, Wiltord, Materazzi, Trezeguet. Trezeguet struck the crossbar. France's penalty missed. Italy led. The noise was asymmetric, Italian sections, not the full bowl. Daniel held. Grosso stepped up. The silence before the run-up was the deepest of the night, the entire stadium holding itself. Then he scored, and the stadium did not produce a noise. It produced a physical event. The sound hit the glass of the broadcast booth as a pressure wave. 69,000 people releasing simultaneously, not in sections, not directionally, but as one unified detonation of sound that bounced off every surface in the stadium and arrived at the booth from every angle at once. The ground contacts update read 4 words, target stationary. Head down, stationary. head angled slightly forward, shoulders dropped, the posture of a man absorbing defeat through his entire body. At 310 meters, in the loudest 5 seconds the stadium would produce all night. Daniel fired once. The body was not discovered for 22 minutes. In the context of a penalty shootout conclusion, 69,000 people simultaneously standing, embracing, leaving their seats, flooding the aisles, a man slumped forward in row F was not a crisis. He was part of the landscape of defeat. French supporters around him were in various states of collapse. Heads in hands, faces buried in scarves. Nobody looked twice at a man who wasn't moving. Al-Zarani's companion noticed first. He shook the shoulder. Once. Twice. Then he went still himself. Not screaming, not running, but going completely motionless in the particular way that people go motionless when their mind is processing something it does not want to confirm. He sat with the body for 4 minutes before he stood and walked, not ran, to the nearest steward. What he said to the steward was never recorded. What the steward did was call a medical team. What the medical team found, 4 minutes after that, was a man with no visible external wound, slumped in his seat, who had no pulse, and whose body temperature had already begun to drop in a way that was inconsistent with a cardiac event of recent onset. The stadium medical coordinator declared the scene irregular at 23:41. German federal police were notified at 23:43. By 23:51, Daniel was on the U-Bahn. He had exited through Gate 7, the same gate Al-Zarani had studied 6 days earlier, coffee in hand, watching a maintenance crew work on a side entrance while, maybe, possibly, for 12 minutes, looking at exactly the right part of the broadcast compound. That detail would not surface until the German investigation was already 18 months old. By the time investigators cross-referenced the surveillance footage from Gate 7, a secondary exit used predominantly by broadcast personnel, they had a timestamp and a physical description that matched dozens of people who had used that gate in the same 15-minute window. The modified camera housing had been left in a pre-designated location inside the booth, disassembled into components that, individually, had no forensic signature that distinguished them from standard broadcast equipment. The German investigation identified the firing mechanism 7 weeks later. They identified it as custom fabricated. They could not identify its origin, its manufacturer, or the person who had assembled it. The Al-Qas Sport accreditation for Met Demir cleared every check the investigation ran. Because there was nothing to find. The surveillance team exfiltrated across 4 separate routes over 36 hours. One team member experienced a document check at Berlin Hauptbahnhof that lasted 11 minutes, a routine check amplified by the security presence around the World Cup final venue, and passed without incident. The ground contact, who had been seated in row G, 3 positions from the body, was interviewed by German police the following morning as a witness. He was one of 47 witnesses interviewed that day. He answered every question accurately about what he had seen. A man who appeared to fall asleep during the penalty shootout, because that was, in fact, exactly what he had seen. He was released without further contact. The operation was, by every external measure, complete. The German federal investigation ran for 11 months. It was not unsuccessful in the way that investigations fail through incompetence. It was unsuccessful in the way that investigations fail when the infrastructure they are examining has no false floor to find. They identified the probable shooter position. They recovered the bullet. They reconstructed the trajectory with sufficient precision to confirm the broadcast booth as the origin point. They identified Met Demir as the accredited occupant of that position. They contacted Al-Qas Sport. Al-Qas Sport provided the employment file. Every document was legitimate. The Turkish address was a real address, a mailing accommodation that had been used for 8 months and quietly deactivated 3 weeks after the final. The Turkish camera operator's registry non-appearance was noted. It was attributed to the registry's known incompleteness. This was the same explanation Nadia had used in Munich. It was the same explanation that was true. The registry was incomplete, and it closed the same door that Nadia had noticed and not walked through. Nadia's end-of-tournament HR note was in the Al-Zarani sport system. It flagged the registry discrepancy as an unresolved follow-up item for future contracts. The German investigation never requested Al-Zarani Sport's internal personnel files. They requested the official employment record, which was provided, which was clean. The note sat in the system, unread by anyone who mattered, flagging a discrepancy that pointed, if you knew what you were looking at, directly at the construction of the legend. Nobody knew what they were looking at. The file was suspended in June 2007. The money networks Al-Zarani had managed did not collapse. This was the strategic consequence that the operational authorization had weighed and accepted going in. The understood limitation of eliminating a financial facilitator rather than dismantling the network itself. The network was architecture. Al-Zarani was one person inside it. His removal created disruption. Channels went dormant. Intermediaries who had worked exclusively through him had no direct replacement contact for a period of weeks. Mossad's internal assessment, reconstructed from partial sources, estimated 18 months before the network reached functional equivalence under new management. 18 months. Against the 20 years Al-Zarani had spent building what he built. The operation had not destroyed the infrastructure. It had introduced a delay, a costly delay in the operational calculus of the people who authorized it, but a delay, not an end. The 27% probability margin that had sat in the authorization file from the beginning was never publicly resolved. The man killed in Section 12, Row F, was carrying Jordanian documents in the name of Tariq Mansour. No government ever officially confirmed his identity as Ibrahim Al-Zarani. No government ever denied it either. The intercept, the door is already open, was reviewed twice more after the operation concluded. Once at 3 months, once at 14 months. Both reviews reached the same formal conclusion. The phrase was most consistent with the first interpretation. Coincidental Hamas Financial Network communication using standard movement metaphor. The second and third interpretations were formally closed. What the reviews could not close was the operational question that the third interpretation had introduced and that the first interpretation's adoption did not eliminate. If someone had known and allowed the operation to proceed, what had they gained from its completion? This question had no confirmed answer. It still doesn't. What it had was a consequence, a specific, personal one. The Met Demir legend could not be burned. Burning it, introducing a detectable signal that the identity had been deactivated, would retroactively change the profile of the Al-Zarani Sport employee under investigation. A legend that goes dark immediately after an assassination at a venue where it was accredited is no longer a clean legend. It becomes a flag. So the legend stayed active. And Daniel stayed inside it. Not operationally, he did not continue working as Met Demir, but the identity persisted in the world, in the Al-Zarani Sport database, in the German investigation file, in Nadia's HR note, and Daniel's real identity could not, for an extended period, be allowed to surface in any context where cross-referencing was possible. This is what intelligence agencies call legend contamination, a cover that cannot be closed because the act of closing it would be its own exposure. Daniel had completed every part of the mission. He had maintained the cover under conditions that had tested it 3 separate times. He had fired one shot at the right moment and walked out without leaving a usable trace. He had done everything right, and he was, for 26 months after Berlin, a man who could not fully be himself in a significant portion of the world. Not because the legend had failed, because it had succeeded too completely to be abandoned. The lie had worked, it just hadn't finished. Intelligence agencies publish operational doctrine. They write about cover construction, legend management, exfiltration protocols, post-operation security. What they don't publish, what doesn't fit into doctrine because it isn't a procedure. is what it does to a person to inhabit someone else for long enough that the border between the two becomes something you have to consciously locate rather than simply know. Daniel had done this 4 times. Each time, re-entry into his real life had taken longer. His supervisors had noted this. They had called it a manageable pattern. He had not called it anything because there was no one he could discuss it with who was cleared to hear it and also capable of answering honestly. This is the thing that the operational record doesn't capture, and that the investigation file doesn't mention, and that the intercept analysis never addressed. The operation succeeded. The man it cost the most was the one who was never in any of the reports. If this is the kind of story you don't hear anywhere else, you already know what to do. Subscribe to Hidden Ops. And don't tell anyone where you found this.